She had the voice that made California Dreamin' famous, but behind the scenes, Mama Cass was living a nightmare. At 300 pounds, she was laughed at, rejected, and forced to starve herself to fit in. The diet that helped her lose 120 pounds also destroyed her heart. Even after death, the cruel jokes continued with the fake story that she choked on a sandwich. Now, 50 years later, her daughter is finally revealing what really killed the woman with one of rock's most powerful voices. Cass Elliot was born Ellen Naomi Cohen on September 19, 1941, in Baltimore, Maryland. Her parents, Philip and Bess Cohen, were second-generation Russian Jewish immigrants who worked hard to build a stable life. Her father ran a lunch wagon business that served construction workers, and her mother was a trained nurse. The family wasn't wealthy, but they got by, and their Jewish heritage gave them a strong sense of resilience. Cass's early years were shaped by constant change. When she was 7, her parents sent her to live with her grandparents for a while so her mother could focus on caring for her newborn sister. Even at that young age, she felt abandoned. That feeling stayed with her, adding to insecurities she would struggle with for the rest of her life. She also had to deal with the way people treated her because of her weight. Society had strict ideas about beauty, and Cass didn't fit them. But even as she faced judgment, she found comfort in something that made her feel free: music. She loved singing for her family and friends, and before long, performing became a way for her to escape the expectations placed on her. Her father's business had its ups and downs, but over time, it became successful. The family moved a lot, eventually settling in Alexandria, Virginia, during Cass's teenage years. She briefly attended George Washington High School before they moved back to Baltimore, where she enrolled at Forest Park High. That's where her love for performing truly took shape. She took part in school plays, and in 1959, she got a small role in The Boyfriend, a summer stock production in Owings Mills. That experience made it clear this was what she wanted to do with her life. Even as she discovered her passion, Cass couldn't escape the harsh reality of societal expectations. By the time she was a teenager, she weighed around 180 pounds, almost twice the size of many of her classmates. People made cruel jokes, and rejection became a familiar experience, especially when it came to auditions. Some casting directors didn't even give her a chance because she didn't match the typical Hollywood image. It hurt, but she refused to let it stop her. Instead, she used humor as a shield, developing a personality so big and magnetic that people couldn't ignore her. It was during high school that Ellen Naomi Cohen decided to reinvent herself. She started going by Cass, possibly inspired by actress Peggy Cass, or simply as a personal choice. Later, she added Elliot as a tribute to a friend who had passed away. This was more than just a name change. It was a state. She was stepping into a new identity, one that gave her the freedom to become the person she wanted to be. After graduating, she moved to New York City, hoping to make a career on stage. But dreams didn't pay the bills. To get by, she worked as a cloakroom attendant at the Bitter End, a well-known nightclub in Greenwich Village. It was a place where up-and-coming talent performed, and Cass made sure people heard her sing. Whenever she got the chance, she would perform for agents and patrons, hoping someone would take notice. The road to success was rough. She auditioned for musicals like I Can Get It For You Wholesale, but lost out to future stars like Barbra Streisand. Casting directors turned her away, often because of her weight. The industry had a rigid idea of what a leading lady should look like, and Cass didn't fit the mold. But she refused to let rejection stop her. She took whatever small acting jobs she could find and kept improving her skills. If one door closed, she would look for another way in. Things started moving in 1962 when she joined the folk trio, the Big Three, with Tim Rose and Jim Hendrick. Folk music was rising in popularity, and the group gained recognition. They performed in coffee houses and appeared on national television shows like The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, and Hootenanny. Their songs, including the banjo song, blended folk and pop influences, giving them a unique sound. But despite their growing success, creative differences led to the group's breakup. During this time, Cass married Jim Hendrix, though their marriage wasn't romantic. Some reports suggest it was a way to help him avoid the military draft. Whatever the reason, their personal and professional lives became intertwined, making this period in her life even more complicated. In 1964, Cass joined a new group called the Mugwumps, alongside Denny Doherty, Zal Yanovsky, and Jim Hendrix. The band had potential, but folk music was beginning to fade as rock and the British invasion took over. They lasted only 8 months, but their time together together wasn't wasted. They recorded songs like Everybody's Been Talkin', which highlighted Cass's powerful voice, and the connections she made during this period would prove life-changing. When the Mugwumps disbanded, it could have felt like another failure. Instead, it became the turning point that led her to something bigger. Cass Elliot officially joined the Mamas and the Papas in 1965, but it was not an easy path. John Phillips, the band's leader, was hesitant about bringing her in. He claimed her voice was too low for the group's harmonies, but there was more to it. Cass struggled with obesity, and John worried her image would hurt the band's success. He made it clear that she didn't fit his vision. Denny Doherty, who had performed with Cass in the Mugwumps, fought for her. Michelle Phillips and producer Lou Adler also believed she belonged in the group. Cass wasn't about to wait for their approval. She followed them to the Virgin Islands, where they were rehearsing. She sang with them until they had no choice but to listen. One night, the four of them harmonized together. That was the moment everything changed. Their voices blended in a way that was completely new. It was something John called the fifth voice, a sound none of them could create alone. Even he had to admit it was special. Cass had finally proven she was essential. A strange story surrounded Cass's voice. She once claimed a falling pipe hit her on the head and expanded her range by 3 notes. People loved the story, but it wasn't true. Some believe she made it up to distract from John's early reluctance to include her. Whatever the reason, it became part of her legend. Once she joined, she became the most recognizable member of the band. Her voice carried their biggest hits. California Dreamin' was released in December 1965 and reached number 4 on the Billboard charts. Monday, Monday came out in 1966 and won a Grammy. Their songs defined the era. Cass's voice made them unforgettable. She was more than just a singer. She had a way of connecting with people. On stage, her presence was electric. On talk shows, she was warm and funny. Fans loved her confidence, even though she sometimes struggled with insecurities. In a time when female stars were expected to fit a certain image, Cass stood out by simply being herself. But behind the scenes, the band was falling apart. Their music was perfect, but their personal lives were messy. Affairs and heartbreak created tension that never went away. John Phillips was married to Michelle Phillips, but Michelle had an affair with Denny Doherty. When John found out in 1966, he was furious. Michelle was temporarily fired and replaced by singer Jill Gibson. Fans were outraged, and Michelle was back in the band 2 months later. Then there was Cass. She had feelings for Denny, but he didn't feel the same way. Instead, he was in love with Michelle. It hurt Cass deeply. She once asked Michelle, "You can have any man you want. Why would you take mine?" It was a painful moment that summed up he felt in the group. The Mamas and the Papas were one of the most influential folk rock bands of the 1960s. In just a few years, they sold nearly 40 million records and released 5 albums and 17 singles. Their music became the voice of a generation, capturing both the dreamlike optimism and the growing unrest of the era. California Dreamin' painted a vivid picture of longing and escape. Dedicated to the One I Love, showcased their signature harmonies. Monday became their most celebrated hit, earning them a Grammy in 1967 for Best Contemporary Group Performance. This was a rare achievement for a folk rock band at a time when rock giants like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones dominated the charts. Released in March 1966, Monday made history as the first song by a group to reach number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Its haunting melody and layered harmonies set them apart, with much of their sound shaped by John Phillips's songwriting and arrangements. But behind the music, tension grew. Conflicts within the band started to take a toll. Despite personal struggles, their influence reached far beyond the charts. They performed at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, a landmark event that helped launch the careers of Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. But their time at the top was brief. By 1968, the band fell apart due to personal conflicts and substance abuse. Their music, however, remained timeless. Their Grammy win and chart-topping success proved that folk rock could break through in a changing music industry. At the heart of the group was Cass Elliot. Known as Mama Cass, she was more than just a singer. She was a cultural icon. The music industry was filled with thin, conventionally attractive stars. But Cass had a presence that went beyond looks. Her voice was powerful, and her personality was larger than life. Fans loved her humor, warmth, and confidence, but the media often focused more on her weight than on her talent. The scrutiny was relentless. Cass faced constant pressure to to fit beauty standards that defined the era. In 1968, she tried a dangerous crash diet, losing over 120 pounds through extreme fasting. The weight loss came at a cost, leaving her with severe health problems. But despite it all, she never changed who she was. Her authenticity made her a symbol of self-acceptance. Cass's charm extended beyond music. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, she became a popular guest on talk shows, where her quick wit and charisma won over audiences. She had a way of making people feel at ease, whether in a television studio or at a party. But her life was cut short. In 1974, at just 32 years old, she died of heart failure. Her passing was a tragic loss, but her influence lived on. She had challenged an industry that often valued image over talent and left behind a legacy that still inspires today. Cass wasn't just a star, she was a connector. Her home in Laurel Canyon became a legendary meeting place for musicians and artists of the time. Dubbed the Gertrude Stein of Laurel Canyon, she hosted gatherings that brought together legends like Joni Mitchell, Eric Clapton, Jim Morrison, Frank Zappa, and members of the Beatles. But these weren't just parties. They were creative spaces where collaborations formed and music history was made. Laurel Canyon was already a haven for artists looking for inspiration and privacy, but Cass's home became something special. Her gatherings were known for their openness. Newcomers and superstars mingled as equals, sharing ideas over food and music. One of the most important moments in rock history happened in her living room. David Crosby and Stephen Stills met Graham Nash there for the first time, leading to the formation of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. On another night, Eric Clapton listened as Joni Mitchell played new songs while Cass's young daughter watched nearby. These moments seemed small at the time, but they shaped the future of music. The parties reflected the spirit of the era: artistic freedom, rebellion, and a sense of community. But they also had a darker side. Substance abuse was everywhere, mirroring the struggles of the counterculture movement. Even so, Cass remained at the center, bringing people together in a way few could. Her home wasn't just a place for entertainment. It was a creative hub where the energy of the 1960s came to life. The Mamas and the Papas were one of the biggest folk rock groups of the 1960s. Their harmonies defined a generation, but behind the music, things were falling apart. Personal betrayals, substance abuse, and financial problems led to their breakup in 1968. The group's troubles started with tangled relationships. John Phillips, the band's leader, was married to Michelle Phillips, but Michelle had an affair with fellow bandmate Denny Doherty. That betrayal created tension that never fully healed. At the same time, Cass Elliot had deep feelings for Doherty, but he didn't feel the same way. Their relationships were complicated, and those emotions spilled into their music and their lives. Drugs and alcohol made everything worse. John Phillips struggled with cocaine and heroin addiction, which made him paranoid and controlling. Denny Doherty drank heavily, and Michelle Phillips later said they never entered a recording studio without alcohol and marijuana. The chaos of their lifestyle affected their ability to work together. Money became another problem. Even though they sold nearly 40 million records worldwide, the group faced financial disputes. John Phillips controlled most of the band's money, making others feel powerless. Arguments over earnings caused even more resentment. By 1968, they were burned out. Michelle Phillips later said they had nothing left in the picture. Their creative energy was gone. That same year, Cass Elliot decided to leave. Her solo single, Dream a Little Dream of Me, became a hit in 1968, proving she didn't need the group to succeed. With personal betrayals, addiction, and money problems piling up, the Mamas and the Papas officially broke up. Cass Elliot's story didn't end there. In April 1967, at just 25 years old, she made a bold choice to become a single mother. She had always wanted a child, and later said she longed for a creature to love. Her daughter, Owen Vanessa Elliott, was born while Cass was still with the band. She kept the pregnancy a secret for months, helped by the fact that people often made assumptions about her weight. Being a single mother in the 1960s wasn't easy. Attitudes were shifting, but many still saw single mothers as a sign of moral decline. Cass didn't let that stop her. She embraced motherhood while balancing balancing a demanding career. She often had to leave Owen with governesses, which wasn't easy for either of them. Owen later said it hurt her mother when she grew too attached to nannies. Despite the challenges, Cass never regretted her choice. She built a successful solo career while proving that motherhood didn't mean giving up on her dreams. The rest of the band didn't find the same success. In 1971, they reunited to record one last album, People Like Us. But it wasn't about the music. It was about money. Each member faced fines of up to $1 million if they didn't complete their contract with Dunhill Records. The recording sessions were tense. Cass had already built a solo career. John Phillips was involved with actress Genevieve White. Michelle Phillips had started acting. None of them were fully invested. The album flopped. People Like Us lacked the group's signature energy. Cass Elliott's powerful voice was missing from many tracks because she was sick during recording. The album's single, Step Out, barely reached number 81 on the charts. The album itself peaked at number 84. It was a long fall from their earlier success. Michelle Phillips later admitted People Like Us sounded like what it was: four people trying to avoid a lawsuit. Once the album was released, they disbanded for good. The Mamas and the Papas had started as pioneers of folk rock, but by the early 1970s, their time was over. Mama Cass Elliott's solo career started with a song that became an instant classic. In 1968, she released Dream a Little Dream of Me. The song had been around since 1931, but her version made it famous all over again. It was first recorded with the Mamas and the Papas for their album The Papas and the Mamas. But when the group fell apart, the song was re-released under her name. That decision changed everything. It climbed to number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100, reached number 2 on the Adult Contemporary chart, and held the number 1 spot in Australia for 2 weeks in September 1968. It also charted in the UK at number 11, Ireland at number 13, and South Africa at number 8. The success of the song led to her debut solo album, Dream a Little Dream, released on October 19, 1968. The album was recorded in just 10 days at Wally Heider's studio in Hollywood. At first, she wasn't sure about naming it after the single, but with the song already a hit, it made sense. She took full creative control over the rest of the album, choosing a mix of songs from artists like Graham Nash and Leonard Cohen. The album blended folk rock with deeper, more personal themes. It spent 10 weeks on the Billboard charts and peaked at number 87, making it her highest charting solo album in the U.S. Between 1968 and 1973, Cass released 5 solo albums. Each one showed her ability to move between different styles of music. 2 of her biggest songs came in 1969, Make Your Own Kind of Music and It's Getting Better. Both were written by Barry Mann and Cynthia Weil and carried a powerful message about self-acceptance. Make Your Own Kind of Music encouraged people to follow their own path, no matter what others thought. It reached number 36 on the Billboard Hot 100 and climbed to number 6 on the Adult Contemporary chart. It's Getting Better peaked at number 30. The songs became especially meaningful for women at the time, as social norms were shifting. Decades later, they found new popularity through television and social media. Cass's albums were a mix of styles. Dream a Little Dream featured covers of Leonard Cohen's You Know Who I Am and John Hartford's California Earthquake. The Road Is No Place for a Lady, released in 1972, leaned into cabaret-style performances. Some of her albums struggled commercially, with a few failing to chart, but critics praised her vocal talent and emotional depth. Music wasn't her only focus. Cass was also a natural entertainer, and television gave her another way to connect with audiences. In 1969, she hosted the Mama Cass television program, a primetime variety special featuring Joni Mitchell, Buddy Hackett, and Mary Travers from Peter, Paul, and Mary. The show combined music and comedy, proving she could do more than sing. Variety specials were popular at the time, but very few were led by female solo artists. Even though the show wasn't picked up for a full series, it showed a different side of her talent. In 1973, she returned to television with Don't Call Me Mama Anymore. By then, she was ready to leave the Mama Cass image behind. This special was different from anything she had done before. It had a cabaret feel, mixing humor with dramatic musical performances. She was taking creative risks, and critics appreciated her ability to balance comedy with heartfelt songs. Cass was also a regular guest on some of the biggest talk shows of the era. She appeared multiple times on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, often promoting her latest music or upcoming tours. She also became a familiar face on variety shows like Hollywood Squares, where her quick wit and humor made her a favorite. Whether she was singing or just chatting, audiences loved watching her. Even though Cass Elliot never reached the same level of commercial success as she had with the Mamas and the Papas, she built a career that proved she could stand on her own. Her songs continued to inspire new generations, her television appearances left a lasting impression, and her bold personality made her unforgettable. Mama Cass Elliot was at a turning point in her career when she died suddenly on July the 29th, 1974. She was just 32 years old. 2 days earlier, she had finished a sold-out 2-week solo engagement at the London Palladium. Every night, the crowd gave her standing ovations. She performed multiple encores. It was a moment she had worked toward for years. After the Mamas and the Papas broke up in 1968, she struggled to establish herself as a solo artist. Now, she was finally getting the recognition she deserved. In the days leading up to her death, Cass attended several celebrations. She went to Mick Jagger's birthday party. She was honored at a brunch. She was in good spirits, but physically exhausted. She coughed often. She had trouble catching her breath. She pushed through it, determined to enjoy the moment. On the night of July 28th, she returned to the Mayfair flat she had borrowed from singer-songwriter Harry Nilsson. The next morning, she was found dead. The autopsy confirmed she had died in her sleep from heart failure. Years of crash dieting had weakened her heart. The flat where she died would later become infamous. On September 7, 1978, Keith Moon, drummer for The Who, died in the same bedroom. He overdosed on heminevrin, a drug prescribed to help with alcohol withdrawal. Two music legends dying in the same room within 4 years led many to believe the place was cursed. Even Harry Nilsson felt uneasy about it. He sold the flat soon after Moon's death. Despite the autopsy report, rumors about Cass's death spread almost immediately. The most infamous was the story that she had choked on a ham sandwich. A doctor at the scene noticed an uneaten sandwich near her bed. He made an offhand comment. The press ran with it. Soon, it became widely believed. But the coroner, Dr. Keith Simpson, found no food blocking her airway. There were no drugs in her system. Her heart had simply given out. The ham sandwich story didn't just spread on its own. Cass' manager, Alan Carr, helped keep it alive. He feared the media would assume she had died from a drug overdose. He thought the choking rumor was the lesser evil. But the story fed into cruel stereotypes about Cass's weight. It turned her death into a joke. For decades, it overshadowed the truth. Her daughter, Owen Elliott Kugel, was only 7 when her mother died. As she grew older, she faced constant questions about the rumor. People repeated it like a fact. It haunted her childhood. Years later, she learned the full story. Sue Cameron, a journalist and close friend of Cass, admitted that Alan Carr had asked her to spread the false report. He had wanted to protect Cass's reputation. Instead, he created a myth that followed her for years. Owen has spent much of her life correcting the record. She wants people to remember the truth. Cass Elliot wasn't a joke or a tragic headline. She was a powerhouse performer. She had one of the most unforgettable voices of her time. The real story isn't how she died, it's how she lived. Mama Cass Elliot left a mark on music that time couldn't erase. In 1998, 24 years after her passing, she was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was a moment that recognized not just her success, but the lasting impact she had on folk rock. Her daughter, Owen Elliott Kugel, accepted the honor on her behalf, standing in for the mother whose voice had defined an era. As a member of the Mamas and the Papas, Cass helped create a sound that captured the spirit of the 1960s. Their harmonies were rich, their style was unique, and their songs became the soundtrack of a generation. California Dreamin' painted a picture of longing and change, while Monday soared to #1 and won them a Grammy in 1967. By the time of their Hall of Fame induction, the group had sold over 40 million records worldwide, a testament to how deeply their music resonated. Cass's voice was the heart of it all. Her powerful alto stood out, giving the group's harmonies a depth that set them apart. Many believed she had the strongest voice in the band. Even after the Mamas and the Papas disbanded, she continued to shine. Her version of Dream a Little Dream of Me turned an old song into something unforgettable. It became a classic, proving her ability to connect with listeners on a deeper level. Her induction into the Hall of Fame fame was more than a tribute to past achievements. It was recognition of a woman who broke barriers and defied expectations.